This is the Grizzly track saw. It's only $229, comes with 9 feet of track, the saw, and everything you need to cut stuff. But is it a good $229? Because not all budget tools are worth the budget. Let's go. This is my very first Grizzly product. I've never owned and or reviewed a big Grizzly product. I purchased this myself, and after getting in the shop, I was quite excited to put it through the paces because I've heard a lot of good stuff about Grizzly tools. Some things about this saw surprised me for the good, and then some not so good. Let's go. Now when the package came in, it did have a little damage here on the end, and the tracks could have slipped out. That's nothing to do with Grizzly. It just, you know how that stuff is in shipping, but it did have some damage on it, but nothing inside was damaged. Unboxing everything, there was 2 empty boxes, that just spacer boxes, and then literally you get 2 boxes that actually have product, which is the track saw itself and the tracks. Taking the track saw out of the package, it's a very good looking track saw. I like the way it looks, just that silver on black. It looks really good. It also feels pretty good in the hand initially, but it feels a little awkward here at this angle. It feels like this handle is down way back behind it versus a lot of them are on top. So it's just first impression there. You also get 2 track clamps as well as whatever this piece is, we'll figure that out. All right, with this kit, you get 3 tracks actually that you can put together to equal 9 feet of track, which is fantastic because that allows us to cut a full length sheet of plywood. Now out of the pack, everything looks pretty good, but I did notice one issue straight away, and this is the splinter guards are loose. On this one, the glue has come loose, it didn't stick, which I've never had that happen on any other track, so slightly concerning. And this one you can tell that it's barely stuck on there, and then on this one it also is fairly loose, so that's probably not going to stick around very long. They do include the track connectors on the bottom, so you can connect all these together. Also worth noting is on the tracks, this shouldn't be this way. This is kind of perturbing. So you can see this splinter guard is poorly applied. It's not even sticking past the guide rail like it should be on one end, and on the other end is sitting there. It's just all wumpy-jawed. Come on, y'all. What's going on with that? You can see the others are applied straight. That is not. Also, I placed it back where it should go, but I didn't move it. It's not on there on this end, sticking past on this end. So quality control on the tracks is, I would give it a poor, fair, not great. So we'll see how the rest of it turns out. Putting the tracks together is fairly simple. It comes with these 2 rails, actually comes with 4 of those, so you can connect all 3. But what I like to do is use a precision straight edge. You can get these relatively inexpensive. These are handy to have in the shop for a bunch of purposes. But I like to hold it on the back side of the track. That way it's all straight. I know that it's straight, and then I tighten down those bars. And you just need to snug those. Don't over tighten these screws on any tracks, because if you do, it'll actually dent the aluminum tracks. I've seen that on Vestal as well as Milwaukee, so just be cautious with that. All right, we'll go over the features of this track saw. Now, what you get is a corded track saw. You get 5,500 RPMs here. This is not variable speed, but at this price point, you typically don't see that anyway. This does weigh 11 pounds, so it's not overly heavy. Honestly, it sounds heavier than it is, but that's how much it weighs. Now, I still think that this handle design's a little bit awkward. Let me grab the Milwaukee. As you can see, the handle, it puts your wrist kind of at a weird angle back here until you plunge it, and then it's probably fine. We'll figure that out when we test the power of it. But it's just a kind of an awkward way to literally grab that. But I broke this wrist in troop school, so it's kind of, I don't know, it's uncomfortable to me. Unlike the Milwaukee, it's more forward or more angled to the forward position, and it's just much more ergonomic on the hand. And it's not a lot. It's probably just 5 or 10, maybe not even 10 degrees, probably 5 degrees or so, but it's just enough that it makes you feel like you're reaching like this to grab it. Just minor. Now, as far as fit and finish of the saw, it feels good. Like, it feels nice and not cheaply made, because I know a lot of times when you get, say, a budget saw like the Win or even the Ryobi, they feel a little less quality, but this one doesn't. It feels really nice. And you'll notice that this one also, it does have a riving knife that plunges with the blade. So you'll be able to plunge with this saw, and you get that riving knife that'll prevent kickback or pinching of the wood. I do love to see that. A couple of things on the front. It looks pretty good. I wish they wouldn't put that on there. The little QR code just kind of takes away from the look. I like aesthetics of tools. I like that you kind of take that into mind when you're designing something. And I would not want to just put a random QR code on there about parts and support. That should just be in the box or the manual, something like that. But that's just personal preference. But otherwise, I think it looks really good. The black and green. It's a really nice looking green color. One thing I did notice straight away out of the box is this doesn't seem to pivot. Pivot! And man, is that gonna be difficult to connect dust collection to like that. Surely it's got to come around. Am I using it wrong? I guess it does kind of pivot around. Whew. Okay, so it does move, but it takes a little oomph to get that around there. So that's no problem. Glad it does move. I wish it moved a little easier, pivoted a little easier, because that way it would move with the hose like a lot of the other ones do. We do have onboard tool storage right here built into the handle so that you could change out the blades, etc. I've yet to figure this out. This is what I'm assuming should be the lock, so that when you plunge it down, you can lock this in place so you can access that bolt with that onboard tool. But I can't, it doesn't lock in. So if I'm pushing this button, I have yet to figure it out. Oh, there it goes, it went in, but it's not staying. I'll check the manual and get back. All right, blade change on this. This is not a plunge lock. This is a blade lock, so that when you change the blade, it stops it from spinning. The problem is you have to, the spring is fairly stout on this, so the plunge, it takes a little bit of force. And then the manual literally says to push the blade lock while operating loosening the bolt. The problem with that is you can't hold this in position and push the button at the same time. So if I'm having to plunge this and then try to reach through to hold the blade or the bolt lock so that I can loosen that off, like, that's a pain in the rear. Like, I don't know of any other track saw that's like that. So the depth marker on here, very high contrast, easy to see, black on white. I like that. Also on the degrees for bevel cuts, you do get 0 to 45 bevel cuts, but there are no positive stops here, and you don't get more or less than that. So a lot of saws get -1 degrees all the way up to 47 or 48 degrees. This one is literally 0 to 45. On the depth stop, it works pretty well, but it is a little bit sticky, much like the Ryobi was. I wasn't really a fan of how sticky it was. In other words, it doesn't slide real smooth. But I do like that it does have an indicator, little groove indicator. It's very easy to lock that in place. I don't think you'll have a problem with the depth adjustment. It's just kind of, you can feel some teeth in there that it's grabbing onto to lock it in place. And you can even hear them. But once you get it where you want it, say if we wanted 3/4 of an inch, we can just lock it down. It's very easy to lock down. I kind of like this. I wish it slid a little smoother, but other than that, I think it's going to work just like it needs to. I did figure out what this piece was for. This goes on the back. I have never seen this on a track saw ever. This is a first for me, but this goes on there. They're called this a stabilizer, and it says in the manual that it attaches to the base plate and clips to the guide rail to prevent the saw from accidentally derailing. Never seen that, never had a problem or an issue with it derailing, or any track saw derailing. So maybe that's just something they're using to help the accuracy of it. Not real sure, we'll figure that out. I always get the question about track compatibility. Will it work on other brands' tracks? And the Grizzly does not fit on the Win. And if you don't know, Win, Festool, Milwaukee, and a couple of others all interchange with each other. In other words, all the tracks should work on the other saw. The Grizzly doesn't fit on the Win track like it should. It just will not seat down on there. I've loosened these off to try to get it to fit. It doesn't work. Putting it on the Milwaukee track, it actually sits down on there like it should. So I'm not sure why it doesn't fit properly on the Win track, but it doesn't. But it will work on the Milwaukee track, but of course, splinter guard doesn't fit because I've cut it to my Milwaukee saw. As far as the Grizzly track goes, one thing I do like is the bottom, or this felt pad that's on the bottom. It is pretty sticky. I know on the Win track it wasn't. It just kind of slips and slides around. It's not the best on the Win. I wasn't impressed with that in that review. When you set it on the plywood, it has a tendency to kind of slip and move. When the Grizzly is on there, you can pick it up and make it move, obviously. But when you put pressure on it or just have it on its own weight, it's sticky. I like that. It does stick nicely. So what that means is a lot of times when I'm cutting plywood, I don't normally clamp the tracks down because I don't feel a need for it, especially if it's sticking like that. But if it doesn't stick, then that causes issues with it moving while you're trying to cut, like the wind. My only wish is they took a little more quality control with their tracks. As you can see, because this wasn't properly applied, now I've got an overlap. I'm gonna need to trim that off. You could pull it all the way off and move it, but then it messes with the stickiness. And speaking of the stickiness, out of the box, these splinter guards were falling off. That's just not great, but you know, it is budget level track saw, so you kind of have to take some of the bad with the good, but I think that's something that could be easily improved with very little cost. All right, let's power it up and see what kind of power she has. She's loud, and she takes a long time to spin down. There's also no soft start, so it's stop or go. It does have 2 adjustment knobs to adjust the tension to the track so you can get a nice, good fit so it doesn't slop around on you. All you want to do is, you don't want that. You can snug these up. What I don't care for is you have to have the wrench to move these off, much like the DeWalt. I wasn't a fan of that one either. I much prefer when you can just snug them up, but this is what we got. You have to be careful because if you get it too tight, then it won't slide on your guide rail. And this is a cam, so it's thinner on one side, and as it goes around, it thickens up, so that's how it kind of snugs itself up. You have to do that on front and back. First thing you do when you get a track saw, the first cut you make is actually taking the splinter guard and trimming it to the blade that you're using or the saw you're using. That's what you're doing here. One thing I noticed while doing this is the derailing attachment actually does work. So this is going to also work for an anti-tip. That's pretty obvious what that's for now that I've used it and looked at it. It literally just slides in and locks in on a little bitty lip on the outside of this track. Milwaukee's track's not going to have that, or Wynn's track's not going to have that, so this is Grizzly specific to the track to be able to use that little lock. All right, observation, just starting and cutting in this plywood, I set the depth at 7/8 of an inch, so it should be cutting all the way through, but apparently it doesn't take into account the track, so we're about an 1/8 inch shy of cutting all the way through, so I'm going to lower it down to the 1 inch mark. This is for 3/4 inch plywood. All right, cutting through the plywood, after I got the depth set right, 1 inch is just the right depth. I can tell that dust collection works fairly good, better than the Wynn in my opinion. Not as good as maybe the Milwaukee or Festool, but decent for dust collection, especially since it does have a fairly large size hole right there on the side. As far as power goes, it seemed to be bogging a little bit on this 3/4 inch plywood. We're fixing to cut some thicker walnut, so that'll tell the tale on power. But as far as the cut goes, nice smooth cut. I did get hung up on the track. There's something that I can't, they're not perfectly aligned, and I've tried to adjust this, and it just seems like I can't get these two aligned. All right, after a little bit of tweaking, I was able to get the tracks perfectly aligned right here, so everything is gliding like it should, so that's good. All right, first impression on the cut as far as quality goes. It's got a nice, decent blade on there. That's the underside of that piece of plywood I just cut. Not a single splinter I can see anywhere. So a nice, good, smooth cut with that blade. Cutting through walnut, it did okay. It did have a little bit of trouble. It did bog down pretty good at one point, but then it powered through. I think some of that's probably due to the blade being a finer tooth blade. And the dust collection I thought was really good. I'm not mad at the dust collection at all. I think it does pretty good. You can see there's minor dust collection on the floor, or dust on the floor rather, but most of it did get collected. Now, does it cut square? That is the question. There is a tiny bit of light right there at the top, as you can see, and it's just, I'm talking about a little bit there on the bottom, so it looks like maybe the blade was deflecting a little bit, but it is really, really close. Probably one of the closer ones I've seen that was out of square. Usually they're really bad or they're right on. And this one's kind of just barely, I'm talking, I don't even know how much, like feeler gauge. We'd have to use a feeler gauge to see how much. It's such a fine amount that it's out just in a couple of places. And I think that's the blade or the saw or something is deflecting a tiny bit. And we're talking a minor amount too. You see it right there close to the top, a little bit of light there. But other than that, it's pretty good. All right, I'm gonna try a bevel cut here, and based on my experience with many other track saws and what I've seen so far, I'm not so sure how this is gonna go. All right, so my suspicions were correct about this bevel cut on the track saw. One, the power It was bogging really, really bad, and the cut depth just isn't there to get through this about 1 3/4 inch piece of walnut. You could get through a 2x8, 2x6, something like that, but it's going to be, I don't know, I don't even know if it has that. It should be able to plunge through that, but this is a 6 1/4 inch blade. In other words, most all your other track saws are 6 1/2, and I think that's a very significant thing to point out, especially if you're wanting to do bevel cuts. I don't think this saw has a power to do the bevel cuts consistently. I actually can smell a little bit of the motor smell. You know how if you heat up an electrical motor, it kind of has that smell. So it does have a faint odor of that after that, as well as after that other square cut. Not really great for thick woods. If you just need a bevel on a 1-inch piece, it'll be perfectly fine. One thing I do like that I was unsure about is this little track keeper. That's what I'll call it, tracker keeper. It locks into that, and that is a good, you can see I just left the saw setting there. It literally will keep it from tipping, so it's an anti-tip as well as keeps it from jumping tracks. So that's a good little feature to have on there. But overall, I think it's lacking a little bit of power for this bevel cut. Now, before we get into what I like, what I don't like, and what I really, really don't like, I'll kind of give us a comparison on if you're shopping in the market for a track saw, because this is a Win cordless track saw. It's in about the same price range as this. This is a cordless version. I reviewed it a while back. I'll drop a link in the description to it. And then on the higher end, this is the Milwaukee track saw. And so I'm kind of using this to compare as the top tier features, and this to compare to what the budget features look like. The depth setting on this is much better than the Win. I didn't care for the Win's depth setting, but it does have on track and off track indicators, which is very handy to have. Now on the Milwaukee, I love the way this thing adjusts. If you have the budget, I think the Milwaukee is the way to go. Buy once, cry once. It's just superior to the budget models, but not everybody has the budget for one of these or uses them enough to justify the price of that. So if you're in that bucket and you just need a saw to break down sheet goods and things, I think the Grizzly or the Win would be good for you. The Win is a little bit more powerful. It is cordless, so you would deal with another charger and batteries. If you're okay with that, then it's a good saw. It also comes with a 55-inch standard track, or you can get a 2-pack of tracks, anything like that. I think it's a good saw. It also has the anti-tip. So overall, the Win and it has the scribe feature. It's also a 6 1/2 inch saw versus 6 1/4. I think all around, if I'm telling you which one of these budget saws would you pick, Win or Grizzly, I would tell you the Win. But if you just want a corded track saw on a budget, then the Grizzly is a good option. Now, if you just want to buy once, cry once, I don't think there's a better track saw on the market in this price point at under $800 where you can get tracks as well as the charger, the pack out box, the saw, everything that you get with this saw. It is a fantastic value. It's also a cordless saw, M18. You get a 6-amp battery with it. I'll drop a link to this kit that I've got. It's a fantastic track saw. I think it's one of my favorites. Top tier track saws for cutting about anything you want to cut. Plenty of power and battery life as well. Overall, I think the Win and the Grizzly are kind of comparable. The true comparison that I no longer have in the shop that I think this saw compares very closely to is the Ryobi track saw. It suffers from some of the same basically deflection issues, power issues, depth of cut issues. I just think that this is very, very comparable to the Ryobi. And if you saw that review, you knew what I thought about that. I kind of think similar things about this saw. Although this does have a regular riving knife, which is a bonus there, so that's awesome. All right, what I like, what I don't like, and yeah, the ruthless one's really bad. What I like about this is the price, $229 on a regular day. It does go on sale here or there for $20 or so off, sometimes a little more, but around $200, you're getting a track saw that comes with also what I like, 9 feet of tracks. Not everyone does that. Most of them are 55 inches or they're like 27 1/2, and you put two together and you got 55 inches. So I like the fact that they have done this 3-foot tracks so that you get enough for 9 feet. In other words, you can cut all the way from the beginning of the piece of plywood all the way to the end. In other words, you have enough room to kind of go into the cut and not plunge into the cut. I like the fact that they did that. I also like that the tracks are fairly sticky on the bottom. You don't always need clamps if you're just cutting plywood or whatever. I put this in the I don't dislike it, but I don't love it category. The adjustments for the height, the bevel's fine, it works just fine. I wish there was some bevel stops on there, or hard stops, or positive stops on there, but the depth adjustment, I do wish didn't stick, but it works pretty good. I also wish there was on-track and off-track indicators, much like is on the Milwaukee, the Festool, and a few others. I do like the little track keeper that keeps its anti-tip or keeps it from jumping the rail. I think that's a nice little add-on and it works pretty well. It's not as easy to pick up off the track. As you can see, it'll stick to it, but that's what it's supposed to do. I also like the dust collection. This is probably the best dust collection I've seen at this price point, $229. It doesn't get much better than that. Milwaukee's slightly better, probably a little better, and Festool's better as well. I just think that it did a really good job with dust collection. Cut quality on plywood, I like that a lot too. Nice smooth cut, worked very well, but this is a higher tooth count blade, so it should work a little better. I also like this is an all metal construction, so both side pieces are metal, unlike, I think the Ryobi had a bottom, the shoe of the saw was plastic, and it had quite a bit of deflection. So I think it's a really good, well-made, as far as the structure or the frame of it is well made. Another thing I like is that it has a riving knife. Not all saws in this budget range have that. Some have a riving knife like the Ryobi that moves with the blade instead of independent. You can't plunge with it. This you can. So I'm glad that they did add that feature. Now what I don't like that it is lacking in power. It really is. I could feel that on the plywood. I don't think I felt that even on the Win. I pointed at it. You should see it. The Win cordless track saw, when I made a plywood cut with that, like it done it with these, I could feel this bog a little bit. I don't like the fact that this is a 6 1/4 inch blade. This is a 6 1/2 inch blade. This blade will not fit on this saw. I guess this would fit on that saw, but it lacks that little bit of depth, and you're going to need that if you're doing different bevel cuts and things. I also don't like that it can't fully bevel cut at a 45, but that's kind of be expected at this price point as well as the size of the saw. I wish this cut square. On the thick cut, on the thicker walnut, what you notice here is if I push a little bit of pressure, it's actually moving back here. If I could show you, it's right here on the back side is where this is actually deflecting and not up here. And that's where I saw that minor deviation, and it's very slight. So if you're able to hold it a little square, probably push a little less pressure one way or the other, probably get a better cut, maybe. But it does have a slight deflection in it, which causes a slight inaccuracy as far as perfect 90 degrees. I mean, it was so close it hurt. I could take a feeler gauge and probably feel it out to the 1,000th or whatever it was out. Minor, minor, minor. You probably would never notice that on most things. It's very minor, but it may make a difference depending on what you're building. Another thing I don't care for is how far back this handle is. It just feels like it's too upright. So I much prefer the Win or the Milwaukee or even the Rigid or any of those that kind of have the push. It's almost like they want you to plunge. This is almost like they don't. It's too far back. It's quite an upright piece. And one thing I'm really surprised by, because I had really high hopes for this saw. I really did. I thought it would perform much better, especially being a corded saw. You don't really see the lack of power like this in a lot of corded saws. So I'm assuming probably the amps on this it's a 9 amp saw, that's why. A lot of times these saws should be around the 12 amp power range. This is 9, and you can absolutely tell that it is a lower powered saw. Another thing I don't like, I actually dislike this greatly, was the fact that the splinter guard on the track is so not stuck on there. The sticky material they're using is poor quality, or I got a bad batch or something. I think that should be improved, and that should be an easy fix. You find some better 3M type sticky material and it should stick on there. I don't know that I've had a track on any of my track saws, and I've reviewed a bunch of them, come off like that. That's quite disappointing. So who is this saw for? Who should buy this saw at $229? If you're in the same boat as the Win or the Ryobi track saw and you're only going to want to cut down plywood or MDF, this saw is perfect. It's going to work good for you. You're not going to have to worry about much of anything. You'll have enough power to do that. It's not the most powerful saw on the market, but it's also a very, very, very budget-friendly saw at $229 with 9 feet of track and some clamps to go with that. So it does pretty good. Which one of these track saws do you like? Win, Grizzly, or Milwaukee? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, check out the Win track saw review or the Milwaukee track saw review, depending on which one you're interested in. Click in the box to get you the big old virtual fist bump. Thank you for watching.